The Velthrix Dominion had ruled the stars for 4,000 cycles, and in all that time, they had never known defeat. Their empire stretched across 11,000 star systems, covering 3 massive arms of the galaxy like a dark shadow that consumed everything it touched. Every species they encountered had fallen before them, and every world they desired had become theirs through conquest and blood. High Commander Zorath stood on the observation deck of his flagship, the Eternal Blade, watching the stars drift past the massive windows that lined the chamber. He was a towering figure, standing nearly 3 meters tall, his gray skin covered in ceremonial scars that told the story of 100 conquered worlds. His 4 eyes, each one a deep crimson color, scanned the tactical display that floated before him like a ghost made of light. "What is this world called again?" he asked, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. His tactical officer, a younger Velthrix named Corvin, stepped forward with a slight bow of respect. "The natives call it Earth." "High Commander," Corvin replied. "It sits in an unremarkable star system in the outer spiral arm, far from any significant trade routes or strategic positions." Zorath made a sound of mild interest, something between a grunt and a growl. "And these natives, what do they call themselves?" "Humans, High Commander," Corvin answered, pulling up images on the display. "They are a young species, barely capable of traveling beyond their own atmosphere using primitive chemical rockets." The images showed strange creatures, soft and pink and terribly fragile looking. They had only 2 eyes, only 2 arms, and their bodies appeared to have no natural armor or weapons of any. Kinjareth had seen countless species across his centuries of service, but he could not recall ever seeing anything quite so pathetically weak. "They look like prey animals," Zorath observed with what might have been amusement. "How have they survived on their own world long enough to develop any technology at all?" "Unknown, High Commander," Corvin admitted. "Our scans show their planet is actually quite hostile, with extreme temperature variations, dangerous predators, and unstable geological activity. Yet somehow they have become the dominant species." Zorath dismissed this information with a wave of his massive hand. It did not matter how they had survived on their little world, because soon they would belong to the Dominion like everything else. "What resources does this Earth possess?" he asked. Corvin brightened at this question, clearly having prepared for it. "The planet is rich in heavy metals and rare minerals, High Commander, and its position would serve well as a supply station for our expansion into this sector of the galaxy." "Then we shall take it," Zorath declared, as if he were discussing nothing more significant than choosing what to eat for his morning meal. This was how the Dominion operated, and this was how it had always been. They saw, they wanted, they conquered, and they moved on to the next target. There was no debate, no diplomacy, no consideration of whether the native species might object. The strong ruled, and the weak served. And this was the natural order of things. "Prepare a strike force," Zorath commanded. 200 Talon-class warriors should be more than sufficient for such a primitive world. Corvin hesitated for just a moment, and Zorath noticed this with a slight narrowing of his 4 eyes. "You have something to say, tactical officer?" 200 Talon-class warriors is a significant force for a species at this level of development. "High Commander," Corvin said carefully. "Standard protocol would suggest perhaps 50 would be adequate." Zorath turned to face his subordinate fully, and Corvin instinctively took a step backward. "I did not achieve my position by taking unnecessary risks," Zorath said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "We know nothing of these humans beyond what our long-range scans have shown us, and I would rather send too many warriors than too few." "Of course, High Commander," Corvin agreed quickly. "I will prepare the strike force immediately." As Corvin hurried away to carry out his orders, Zorath turned back to the observation windows and stared out at the distant stars. Somewhere out there, a small blue world spun around an ordinary yellow sun, completely unaware that its fate had just been decided by beings it had never met. The humans probably went about their daily lives, working and eating and sleeping, never knowing that a force of 200 perfect killing machines was about to descend. Upon them, Zorath felt something that might have been pity. Though such emotions were considered weakness among his kind, these humans had done nothing wrong, had posed no threat, had not even known the Dominion existed, but they had something the Dominion wanted. And that was enough. It was always enough. 3 standard cycles later, the strike force was ready. 200 Talon-class warriors stood in perfect formation in the launch bay of the Eternal Blade, their black armor gleaming under the harsh lights. Each one had been genetically engineered for combat from birth, trained in 1,000 forms of warfare, and equipped with weapons that could level buildings with a single shot. They were the finest soldiers in the known galaxy, and they had never failed a mission. Strike Commander Vexis stood at the front of the formation, her silver eyes scanning her troops with cold satisfaction. She had led dozens of conquest missions, and this one seemed almost insultingly simple. A primitive species with chemical rockets and projectile weapons posed no real threat to warriors like hers. "You have your orders," Vexis announced, her voice carrying across the launch bay without any need for amplification. "We descend to the planet's surface, we neutralize any resistance, and we secure the major population centers for processing." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "The High Commander has given us excessive force for this mission, which means he expects excessive results, and I will not disappoint him." The warriors responded with a unified shout, raising their weapons in salute. Minutes later, 200 drop pods launched from the Eternal Blade, streaking toward the blue planet below like falling stars on Earth. Astronomers noticed the unusual meteor shower and made notes in their observation logs. Military radar stations tracked the objects but could not identify them by the time anyone realized what was happening. The drop pods had already entered the atmosphere. Strike Commander Vexis landed in a field outside a major human city, her armor absorbing the impact with ease. She stepped out of her pod and surveyed her surroundings, taking in the strange green plants and the distant structures that passed for buildings among these primitives around her. More pods were landing, and her warriors were emerging ready for battle. "All units report," Vexis commanded through her communication system. One by one, her warriors confirmed their positions. They had landed across the planet, surrounding the major population centers. Just as planned, everything was proceeding exactly as it should. "Begin the conquest," Vexis ordered, and then everything went silent on board the Eternal Blade. Zorath waited for the reports that should have started coming within minutes of the landing. He waited for an hour, then 2, then 12. No reports came, no signals came, nothing came at all except an empty silence that seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. "Contact the strike force," Zorath commanded, a strange feeling beginning to form in his chest. "We have been trying." "High Commander," Corvin replied, his voice trembling slightly. "There is no response on any channel." Zorath stared at the tactical display showing the planet Earth, that insignificant little blue world that should have been conquered. Hours ago, Mindruf's finest warriors had descended to that world, and not a single one had reported back for the first time in centuries. High Commander Zorath felt something he did not recognize later. He would realize it was the first tiny seed of fear. 6 cycles passed aboard the Eternal Blade, and the silence from Earth remained unbroken. High Commander Zorath had not slept in 3 cycles, and his 4 crimson eyes had taken on a haunted quality that his crew had never seen. The 200 Talon-class warriors, each one worth more than a small fleet in terms of training and resources, had simply vanished. The tactical display showed no distress signals, no battle transmissions, no final messages of any kind. It was as if the strike force had descended to that blue planet and been swallowed by the void itself. This is impossible, Zorath muttered for perhaps the 100th time. No species at that technological level could defeat 200 of our finest warriors without even allowing them to send a single transmission. Corvin stood nearby, afraid to speak but knowing he must. High Commander, perhaps we should send a reconnaissance probe before committing more forces. Zorath turned on him with fury in his eyes. Probe will tell us nothing that warriors cannot discover for themselves, he snarled. What we need is overwhelming force. I intend to provide it. He pressed the command into his console, and moments later, a holographic image appeared before him. The figure in the hologram was massive, even by Velthric standards, with scars covering nearly every visible portion of gray skin and eyes that burned with an inner fire. High Commander Zorath, the figure rumbled. This communication is unexpected, Warlord Sithris, Zorath replied with a slight bow of respect. I require the services of the Kethvorin. Sithris raised what passed for an eyebrow among his kind. The Kethvorin, known throughout the Dominion as the Unchained Blades, were the most elite fighting force outside of the Ordained themselves. They had crushed rebellions on 100 worlds and brought entire civilizations to heel through sheer terror. The Unchained Blades are not typically deployed against primitive species, Sithris observed. What has happened that requires such force? Zorath hesitated, and in that hesitation, Sithris saw something that deeply disturbed him. He had known Zorath for 2 centuries, and had never seen the High Commander show anything but absolute confidence. I sent 200 Talon-class warriors to a planet called Earth, Zorath admitted. They have not reported back. Not reported back? Sithris repeated. Explain. I cannot explain because I do not understand, Zorath said. And each word seemed to cost him something. They landed on the planet's surface, and then nothing. No communication, no distress signals, no battle data. Simply nothing at all. Sithris was silent for a long moment, processing this information in 3 centuries of service. He had never heard of an entire strike force vanishing without a trace. Tell me about these natives, he said finally. They call themselves humans, Zorath replied, pulling up the same data he had reviewed countless times. Primitive technology, fragile biology, no natural weapons or armor, and by all accounts, they should have been conquered within hours. And yet they were not. And yet they were not. Zorath agreed. Sithris stroked the ceremonial blade at his side, a weapon that had ended more lives than most plagues. I will bring 500 of my finest warriors, he announced. Whatever has happened on this world, we will discover it, and we will end it. I am grateful. Warlord, Zorath said with genuine relief. Do not be grateful yet, Sithris replied. Be grateful when I report this world pacified and ready for processing. The hologram flickered and died, leaving Zorath alone with his thoughts and his fears. 1 week later, the Unchained Blades arrived at Earth orbit in a fleet of sleek black warships that seemed to absorb light itself. Warlord Sithris stood on the bridge of his command vessel, the silence of stars studying the blue planet below with cold analytical eyes, scanned for any signs of the original strike force. He commanded. His officers worked quickly, and within minutes, a disturbing picture began to emerge. We are detecting scattered Velthric's biological signatures across the planet's surface. Warlord, one officer reported, but they are not moving. Not moving? Sithris asked. Stationary, Warlord, and the signatures are degrading in a pattern consistent with deceased organic material. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank into 100 Talon-class warriors dead, scattered across a primitive world like discarded toys. Weapon signatures? Scythrus asked, his voice remaining steady through sheer force of will. None that match any known technology. Warlord, another officer answered. We are detecting traces of chemical propellants, metallic projectiles, and several explosive compounds, but nothing that should have been capable of penetrating Talon-class armor. Scythrus considered this for a long moment. Talon-class armor could withstand plasma fire and energy weapons, far beyond anything these humans supposedly possessed, and yet his sensors were showing him the bodies of 200 warriors who had died wearing that armor, perhaps the original. Assessment of this species was incorrect, Scythrus said slowly. Perhaps they are hiding more advanced technology. Should we conduct orbital reconnaissance first, Warlord? His second-in-command asked. No, Scythrus decided. We will learn nothing from orbit that we cannot learn faster on the ground. And I will not dishonor the memory of the fallen by cowering in space. He turned to face his assembled officers, each one a veteran of countless campaigns. We deploy in full force, and we proceed with maximum caution, he ordered. Whatever killed the first strike force, we will find it and we will destroy it. The unchained blades descended upon Earth like a storm of death, their drop pods screaming through the atmosphere in numbers that blotted out the sun over major cities. Icarus landed in the same field where Strike Commander Veges had touched down 2 weeks earlier, and he immediately noticed the scorched earth and the scattered debris that marked the site of intense combat. Fan out, he commanded. Locate survivors and secure this area. His warriors moved with practiced efficiency, their phase-shifting armor flickering between visibility and near transparency as they advanced within minutes. They found the first body. It was a Talon-class warrior, or what remained of one. The armor had been breached in dozens of places, and the wounds told a story that made no sense. Warlord, one of his lieutenants, called. These wounds were caused by primitive projectile weapons. That is impossible, Scythrus said, moving to examine the body himself, but the evidence was undeniable. Small metal slugs had somehow penetrated armor designed to withstand energy weapons, and they had done so in numbers that suggested the warrior had been hit by hundreds of them. Look at this, another warrior said. Pointing to the ground nearby, there were tracks in the soft earth, human tracks. Dozens of them, but mixed among the tracks were signs of something else. Something that looked almost like deliberate positioning and coordinated movement. They were not hiding advanced technology, Scythrus realized with growing unease. They were fighting with what they had. But they were fighting together, coordinating, adapting. Before he could process this thought further, the silence of the field was shattered by a sound unlike anything he had ever heard. It was a crack, sharp and sudden, and one of his warriors simply collapsed. Then another crack, and another warrior fell contact. Someone shouted, "We are under fire from multiple directions." Scythrus spun, trying to locate the enemy, but he could see nothing. The humans were hiding, concealed in the tall grass and the distant tree lines, firing their primitive weapons from positions that made them nearly invisible. Return fire, Scythrus bellowed, but his warriors were shooting at shadows. The cracks kept coming, and warriors kept falling, and through it all, Scythrus began to hear something else beneath the chaos of battle. It was a sound that would haunt him for the remaining hours of his life. It was laughter, human laughter, wild and defiant and utterly without fear. 3 days later, High Commander Zorath received a single garbled transmission from the planet's surface. Through the static and the screaming, he heard Warlord Scythrus speak his final word before the signal died forever. Impossible. The unchained blades. 500 of the most elite warriors the Dominion had ever produced were gone, and somewhere on that insignificant blue planet, the humans were still laughing. The High Council of the Veilthrix Dominion, had not assembled in emergency session for 800 cycles, the last time such a gathering had occurred. It was to address a plague that threatened to wipe out an entire sector of their empire. Now they gathered again, not because of disease, but because of something far more troubling. 12 figures sat around a massive circular table made of polished black stone, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of holographic displays. These were the most powerful beings in the Dominion, rulers of sectors that contained billions of subjects, commanders of fleets that could darken the skies of 1,000 worlds, and all of them were afraid. High Commander Zorath stood before them, his posture rigid, but his eyes betraying the stress of the past weeks. "I have lost 700 of our finest warriors to this planet," he reported. 200 Talon-class soldiers and 500 unchained blades, all gone without a single survivor. "How is this possible?" demanded Counselor Veth, an ancient Valthrix whose scars had faded to silver with age. "You described these humans as primitive, barely capable of space travel. That assessment was based on the best available data," Zorath replied. "Our long-range scans showed no advanced technology, no energy weapons, no defensive systems that should have posed any threat to our warriors." "Then your scans were wrong," snapped Counselor Draxus from across the table. "Perhaps these humans have allied with an elder race. Or perhaps they possess hidden technology they revealed only when threatened. Those explanations have been considered," Zorath said. "But our final transmissions from both strike forces suggest something else entirely." He activated a holographic playback, and the chamber filled with the sounds of the Ketforn's last battle. The council members listened in silence, as they heard weapons fire and screaming, and that terrible human laughter echoing through the chaos when the playback ended with Warlord Scytherus whispering his final word. No one spoke for a long moment. "What does this tell us?" Counselor Veth asked finally. "It tells us that we have fundamentally misunderstood this species," Zorath answered. "They are not fighting with advanced technology because they do not possess advanced technology. But they are winning anyway." "That makes no sense," Draxus protested. "Superior technology determines the outcome of warfare. This has been proven across 10,000 conquests." "Perhaps not always," said a quiet voice from the end of the table. All eyes turned to Counselor Cythera, the youngest member of the council, and the only one who specialized in xenobiology rather than military strategy. "Explain." Veth commanded. Sether rose and activated her own holographic display, showing detailed images of human anatomy and physiology. "I have been studying the available data on these humans," she began, "and I have found several anomalies that may explain what we are witnessing." She highlighted various aspects of the human form as she spoke. First, humans evolved on what xenobiologists classify as a Category 4 death world, a planet with extreme environmental hazards, including temperature variations of over 100 degrees, active geological instability, and a diverse array of lethal predators. "Many species evolve on hostile worlds," Draxus interrupted. "This alone does not explain their combat effectiveness." "True," Cythera acknowledged. "But humans adapted to their world in a unique way. Their bodies produce chemical compounds during times of stress that actually enhance their physical capabilities rather than triggering submission responses." She showed a graph of human biochemistry that made several council members lean forward in surprise. "When humans are threatened, their hearts beat faster, their strength increases, and their perception of pain decreases," Cythera continued. "They do not become weaker under pressure like most species. They become stronger." "Remarkable," Veth murmured. "There is more," Cythera said. "Humans possess an extremely unusual social structure. They can operate both as individuals making independent decisions and as coordinated groups acting in unison. And they can switch between these modes almost instantly. Without telepathic links?" Another counselor asked in disbelief. Without any apparent communication at all, Cythera confirmed. They seem to possess an intuitive understanding of each other's actions that allows for spontaneous coordination. Zorath had heard enough. This is all very interesting, he said impatiently. But it does not change the fact that I have lost 700 warriors and the High Council expects results. Veth nodded slowly, his ancient eyes fixed on Zorath. What do you propose, High Commander? I propose overwhelming force, Zorath replied. I request permission to deploy the Varanthar Legion. 3,000 of our most decorated soldiers, supported by orbital bombardment capabilities and armored ground units. The council members exchanged glances. The Varanthar Legion was the largest mobile military force in the Dominion, normally held in reserve for major conflicts against technologically advanced enemies. You wish to deploy the Legion against a species with chemical rockets? Draxus asked incredulously. I wish to end this situation once and for all, Zorath answered. No more measured responses, no more assumptions about what these humans can or cannot do. We hit them with everything we have, and we end this. The vote was unanimous 2 weeks later. The Varanthar Legion arrived at Earth Legion Master Kravith, stood on the bridge of the command carrier, Unstoppable Fury, surrounded by tactical displays showing the deployment of 3,000 warriors, 50 armored assault vehicles, and a network of orbital bombardment satellites. He had studied every scrap of data from the failed missions, watching the final transmissions dozens of times, analyzing the patterns of human combat unlike his predecessors. Kravith did not underestimate these humans. He understood that they were dangerous despite their primitive technology, and he had planned accordingly. All units report ready. His communications officer announced begin planetary bombardment. Kravith commanded. Target all major military installations and communication centers from orbit. Beams of concentrated energy lanced down through Earth's atmosphere, striking targets across 6 continents. Human military bases vanished in pillars of fire, their aircraft destroyed on the ground before they could take flight. Bombardment complete, the weapons officer reported. Estimated destruction of 70% of human military infrastructure. Kravith allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. This was how the Dominion waged war. Not with surgical strikes, but with devastating, overwhelming force that left no possibility of effective resistance. Deploy ground forces, he ordered. Secure the population centers and begin processing the survivors. 3,000 warriors descended to Earth's surface in waves of drop pods and landing craft, spreading across the continents like a tide of death. For the first 2 days, everything proceeded according to plan. Human resistance was scattered and disorganized. Just as Kravith had expected after the orbital bombardment, his warriors secured city after city, rounding up survivors and establishing control points. On the 3rd day, things began to change. Legion Master, a field commander, reported. We are encountering organized resistance in Sector 7. Eliminate them, Kravith ordered without concern, but the reports kept coming. From Sector 7, and then from Sector 12, and then from Sector 3. Humans were emerging from underground shelters that the orbital bombardment had missed, from hidden bunkers built beneath cities, from tunnels that seemed to stretch for hundreds of kilometers beneath the surface. They attacked in waves, using whatever weapons they could find, dying by the dozens, but never stopping, never retreating, never surrendering. By day 5, Kravith realized that he was not fighting an army, he was fighting an entire species. On day 11, his forces recovered a damaged reconnaissance probe that had been captured and released by the humans. Attached to the probe was Legion Master Kravius' own ceremonial blade. Cleaned and polished with obvious care, note was attached. Written in crude but unmistakable Dominion script, it read, "You can have this back. Come get the rest yourself." Kravith stared at the message for a long time, his hands trembling in a way they never had before. He had fought species that were more advanced, species that were stronger, species that were larger, but he had never fought a species that would steal his blade and send it back as a taunt day 12. His final transmission reached the Eternal Blade. High Commander. Kravith's voice was barely recognizable. They are not fighting to win. They are fighting to make us bleed. And they will not stop, no matter how many we kill. More keep coming from places we cannot find. We need. The transmission cut off mid-sentence and never resumed the Varanthar Legion. 3,000 of the Dominion's most decorated warriors had joined their predecessors in silence, and somewhere on Earth, humans were reading the message they had written and preparing to write another. Panic had spread through the Vaelthrix Dominion like a disease without cure. Word of the defeats at Earth had leaked beyond the High Council, carried by frightened officers and whispered through the ranks of the great fleets. For the first time in 4,000 cycles, the Empire that had conquered 11,000 star systems was afraid. High Commander Zorath stood before the Eternal Throne. A privilege and a burden that few had ever experienced. The throne room was vast beyond imagining. A cathedral of black stone and golden light that stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadow. And upon the throne sat the Emperor himself, a being so ancient that some believed he had been alive when the first Vaelthrix looked up at the stars and dreamed of conquest. You have failed me, High Commander, the Emperor said, and his voice was like the rumbling of tectonic plates deep beneath a dying world. Drith knelt, his head bowed, his 4 eyes fixed upon the polished floor. I have. Divine One, he admitted. I sent our finest warriors to a primitive world, and none of them returned. Not merely our finest warriors, the Emperor corrected. You sent the Talon Guard, the Unchained Blades, and the Varanthar Legion, a combined force that should have been sufficient to conquer a dozen advanced civilizations. Yes, Divine One. The Emperor was silent for a long moment, and in that silence, Zorath felt the weight of his inevitable execution pressing down upon him. He had failed, and failure in the Dominion was rewarded with death. Tell me, the Emperor said finally, what do you know of these humans? Zorath raised his head slightly, surprised by the question. They are primitive, Divine One, using chemical propulsion and projectile weapons. Their technology is centuries behind our own, and yet they have destroyed everything you sent against them. Yes, Divine One, then they are not primitive, the Emperor declared. They are something else entirely, something we have not encountered before. He rose from his throne, and Zorath felt the air in the chamber grow heavy with ancient power. I am going to give you one final chance, High Commander, the Emperor said. Not because you deserve it, but because I wish to understand what manner of species could accomplish what these humans have accomplished. What would you have me do, Divine One? The Emperor descended the steps of his throne, his massive form moving with a grace that belied his age. I am releasing the Ordained. Zorath felt his blood freeze in his veins. The Ordained were legends, sacred warrior priests who served as the Emperor's personal guard in 4,000 cycles of Dominion history. They had been deployed only twice, and both times, entire civilizations had been erased from existence. Divine One, Zorath whispered. Surely that is excessive force for a single primitive world. Excessive force has already proven insufficient, the Emperor replied. I am not sending the Ordained to conquer this world. I am sending them to discover the truth of what we are facing. He fixed Zorath with a gaze that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone to the terrified soul beneath. 12 Ordained will descend to Earth, the Emperor continued. They will observe, they will engage, and they will report what they find. And you will ensure that their reports reach me without delay or alteration. It will be done, Divine One. 1 week later, 12 drop pods fell through Earth's atmosphere. They did not descend in numbers or with support, for the Ordained needed no support. Each one was a living weapon, enhanced with technology so ancient that their origins had been forgotten. their bodies capable of regenerating from wounds that would kill any normal creature. Their minds linked directly to the Dominion's tactical network. They landed in complete silence, their forms materializing from their pods, like shadows given substance. The lead ordained, a being named Vekros, who had served the throne for over 500 cycles, surveyed the battlefield that Earth had become. Bodies littered the landscape, both Veilthrix and human, testament to the brutal fighting that had consumed this world for months. But Vekros noticed something that his predecessors had apparently missed. Human bodies were not soldiers. He moved among the fallen, examining them with senses that could perceive molecular structures and chemical compositions. There were humans in primitive uniforms who had clearly been military personnel, but alongside them were others wearing civilian clothing. Old humans with gray hair, young humans barely out of childhood, humans with no military training, whose hands showed the calluses of farmers and craftsmen. They all fought, Vekros said through his neural link to his fellow ordained. Not just their warriors, but all of them. Is this not what we expected? Another ordained responded. Primitive species often lack the organization to field dedicated military forces. No, Vekros replied. This is different. These civilians did not fight because they lacked military structure. They fought because they chose to fight. Look at their positioning, their tactics. They coordinated with their soldiers, supported them, died alongside them by choice. The ordained spread across the continent, engaging pockets of human resistance with the devastating power that had made them legends on the first day. They destroyed 3 major human strongholds and killed thousands of defenders, reported unexpected resistance, but confirmed imminent victory on the 3rd day. 2 ordained went silent. Vekros found the remains of one of them, or what little remained. The body was being regenerated, as it was designed to do. But the process was slower than it should have been, and surrounding the fallen, ordained were the bodies of hundreds of humans who had died to bring down a single enemy. They knew they could not kill him. Vekros observed, so they wounded him until he could not fight. And then they kept wounding him, preventing his regeneration, sacrificing themselves in waves to keep him down. The survivors had taken the ordained's weapons and vanished into the wilderness by day 7. 6 more ordained had fallen. Vekros found himself leading the remaining 4 in a running battle against human forces that seemed to appear from nowhere and everywhere at once. They emerged from the ground, from hidden tunnels that honeycombed the earth. They struck from buildings that had been thought destroyed. Rising from the rubble like ghosts, they attacked with weapons that should have been useless against the ordained's armor. But they attacked in such numbers and with such relentless fury that even regenerating bodies began to fail on the night of day 8. Vekros stood alone on a hilltop, watching the distant lights of human fires dotting the landscape. His 3 remaining companions were engaging targets in other sectors. But he had stopped to observe and to think. A human approached him. Vekros detected the figure from kilometers away, a single being climbing the hill with no weapons visible, making no attempt at concealment. He could have killed the human with a thought. But curiosity stayed his hand. The human stopped 10 meters away, close enough for Vekros to see the scars on its face and the exhaustion in its eyes. It was an older human male, with gray in its hair and lines of age around its mouth. You are one of their elite, the human said in heavily accented but understandable Dominion speech. I am ordained, Vekros replied, surprised that this primitive creature had learned his language. We captured one of your priests 3 days ago, the human explained. Before he died, he taught us many things. Before he died, Vekros repeated. Your people killed one of the ordained. 1,100 of my people killed one of your ordained, the human corrected. And we consider it a bargain. Vekros studied this fragile creature standing before him, showing no fear despite facing a being that could end its existence in an instant. Why do you fight? He asked. You can't win. Our empire spans 11,000 star systems. Even if you destroy every warrior we send, more will come." The human smiled, and there was no humor in that smile. Only a cold, hard determination that Vecros had never seen in a species. "Let me tell you something about my people," the human said. "1,000 years ago, we fought each other over which name to call our gods. And we killed millions of our own kind over words." He took a step closer, and Vecros found himself fighting an urge to step back. 500 years ago, we enslaved each other based on the color of our skin. And we built entire economies on the suffering of our brothers. Another step. 100 years ago, we developed weapons that could destroy our entire world. And we pointed them at each other over differences in economic philosophy. The human was now close enough to touch, and Vecros could see the fire burning behind those alien eyes. We are a species that has spent its entire existence fighting against our world, against each other, against everything that has ever tried to destroy us. And we are still here. The human reached into its coat, and Vecros prepared to kill. What emerged was not a weapon, it was a photograph, worn and faded, showing a group of young humans smiling at the camera. "My children and grandchildren," the human said. "Your forces killed them in the first bombardment." He tucked the photograph away. "You asked why we fight. And here is your answer. We fight because we are human. And humans do not surrender, not to each other, not to nature, and not to you." He turned and walked back down the hill. Making no attempt to run or hide, Vecros let him go 4 days later. Vecros sent his final transmission to High Commander Zorath. "They do not fight like soldiers," he reported, his voice broken in ways that had nothing to do with physical damage. "They fight like they have already accepted death. Every farmer with a chemical sprayer, every elder with a sharpened tool. Their children throw stones at our gunships." Asterisk. The Velthrix Dominion had ruled the stars for 4,000 cycles by understanding a simple truth that governed all warfare across the galaxy. Every species had a breaking point. Apply sufficient force, and submission would follow as naturally as water flowing downhill. This was not cruelty, it was mathematics. And mathematics did not lie for 4,000 cycles. This truth had held firm against every challenge, and then the humans broke the equation. High Commander Zorath stood once again before the eternal throne. But this time, he did not come to report victory or to beg for mercy. He came to deliver a warning. "Divine One," he began, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had witnessed. "I have completed the analysis you requested." The Emperor sat motionless upon his throne, his ancient eyes fixed upon the High Commander with an intensity that could crush lesser beings. "Speak," he commanded. Zorath activated a holographic display that filled the throne room with data, charts, biological analyses, and psychological profiles compiled from months of observation and countless sacrifices. "We have finally compiled a complete profile of the human species," Zorath said, "and I must tell you, Divine One, that the results are unlike anything we have ever encountered." He highlighted a 3-dimensional image of the planet Earth, spinning slowly in the air between them. The humans evolved on what our xenobiologists classify as a Category 4 death world, one of the most hostile environments capable of supporting intelligent life. This was known. The Emperor said impatiently, "Yes, Divine One, but we did not understand the implications." Zorath replied, "Their world experiences temperature variations of over 100 degrees between seasons, active volcanic and tectonic activity that reshapes continents, weather patterns capable of leveling cities, and a diverse array of predators that humanity has been fighting since before they developed tools." He pulled up images of Earth's wildlife. Creatures with fangs and claws and poison, creatures that hunted in packs, creatures that could swallow a Valthrix warrior whole. They did not merely survive on this world. Divine One, they conquered it. They drove their predators to extinction. They reshaped their environment to suit their needs. And they did this with nothing but stone tools and determination. Impressive for primitives. The Emperor acknowledged. But this does not explain their combat effectiveness against our forces. It does. Divine One, because it shaped their fundamental nature. Zorath said, humans developed in an environment of constant threat, and their biology adapted accordingly. He displayed a complex diagram of human neurochemistry. When most species face danger, their bodies produce chemicals that encourage submission and flight. This is a survival mechanism that allows weaker individuals to survive encounters with stronger predators. Humans do not do this. The Emperor observed, no, Divine One, humans produce chemicals that enhance their capabilities during times of stress. Their muscles grow stronger. Their pain threshold increases. Their perception of time actually changes to allow faster reaction speeds. Zorath paused to let this sink in. They do not have a submission response. Divine One, instead of becoming weaker under threat, they become stronger. And this biological imperative is so deeply embedded in their species that they cannot override it even when logic demands surrender. The Emperor leaned forward slightly, a gesture that Zorath had never seen before. Continue, but their biology is only part of what makes them dangerous. Zorath said, their psychology is equally remarkable. He displayed recordings captured from human communication networks, images and sounds that the Dominion's intelligence officers had been studying for months. Humans possess a trait that we have never encountered in any other species. A trait that our scholars have struggled to name because no equivalent exists in our language. What trait? The closest translation would be transgenerational spite. Zorath answered, humans do not merely resist threats. Divine One, they remember them. They pass down hatred through generations. They build monuments to their enemies' defeats. They write songs about vengeance that their children's children will sing. He showed images of human memorials, statues commemorating ancient battles, museums dedicated to conflicts that had occurred centuries before. A human who was not yet born when an offense occurred will hate the offender as deeply as if they had witnessed it personally. Zorath explained, this is not rational behavior by any standard we understand, but it is universal among their species. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Processing this information, you are telling me, he said finally, that we have not merely failed to conquer a primitive species. We have given them a reason to hate us for generations. Yes, Divine One. Zorath confirmed. And there is more. He pulled up the final section of his report, the part that had kept him awake for many nights. Humans are a species that has spent its entire existence in conflict, he said, not just against their environment, but against each other. They have fought wars over territory, resources, religious beliefs, political ideology, and sometimes for no apparent reason at all. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. They war among themselves? Constantly, Divine One, and in doing so, they have developed a sophistication in warfare that rivals species far more technologically advanced. They have learned to fight in every terrain, in every condition, against every type of enemy imaginable. Zorath deactivated the display and met the Emperor's gaze directly. The Ordained were not wrong when they reported that the humans fight like they have already accepted death. For humans, death in battle is not a failure. It is a tradition. Their ancestors died fighting, and they expect to die fighting, and they believe their descendants will die fighting as well. Then they will all die. The Emperor said, we have more warriors than they have people. Divine One, Zorath said carefully, I do not believe victory against this species is possible through military means. The throne room fell silent. A silence so complete that Zorath could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his chest. "Explain," the Emperor commanded. And his voice carried a warning. "We could bombard their world until nothing remained but ash." Zorath admitted, "But they have already begun spreading to other bodies in their system. Small colonies on their moon and their neighboring planet. And we cannot be certain we would eliminate all of them." He took a deep breath before continuing. "And even if we succeeded in destroying every human in existence, Divine One, the cost would be catastrophic. Our forces have suffered unprecedented losses against a single primitive world. Losses that are already causing unrest in our outer territories." The Emperor rose from his throne, his massive form casting a shadow that seemed to swallow all light in the chamber. "What would you have me do, High Commander?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that might have been genuine curiosity. "Should we abandon this world and pretend the humans do not exist? I believe we should withdraw from their system entirely, Divine One." Zorath answered, "We should establish a quarantine zone around their space and monitor them from a distance. And we should hope that they forget we exist before they develop the technology to reach us." "Hope?" the Emperor repeated. "You ask me to rule an empire of 11,000 star systems based on hope. I ask you to consider what will happen if the humans do not forget." Zorath said, "They are already reverse engineering our technology from the equipment we have lost. In 50 cycles, perhaps less, they will have faster than light travel. And when they do, they will come looking for us." He thought of Ordained Vecros's final words, the warning that had haunted his dreams. "We did not conquer a civilization. Divine One, we woke something up." 50 cycles later, the first human ship exited faster than light travel at the edge of Velthrix Space. It was a crude vessel by Dominion standards, a patchwork of reverse-engineered alien technology and human innovation, held together by determination and spite. But it worked, and it was not alone behind that first ship. The Dominion's long-range sensors detected more vessels emerging. From the darkness between stars, hundreds of them, then thousands. Humans had not spent 50 cycles recovering. From the invasion, they had spent 50 cycles preparing for what came. Next, the lead ship broadcast a message on all frequencies, in perfect Dominion speech, ensuring that every listening post and relay station would receive and record their words. "People of the Velthrix Dominion, this message is for you and for your Emperor." The voice was calm, measured, and utterly without fear. 50 years ago, you came to our world uninvited. You killed our people without warning. You burned our cities and slaughtered our children. And you thought we would submit. There was a pause, and in that pause, the Dominion heard something that would haunt them for generations. It was laughter, human laughter. "You should have killed us all when you had the chance," the message ended. And the human fleet began its advance. They had remembered. They had prepared, and unlike the Dominion, they did not believe in warnings. The humans had come to deliver a lesson that the galaxy would never forget. Some species were not meant to be conquered. Some species conquered back.